6 racists planned Nat King Cole's death in a basement. Bumpy walked in, and they went silent. Basement smoke curled as 6 men laughed about a killing. Then Bumpy Johnson stepped inside, coat still, eyes steady, and the room learned what silence costs when power doesn't raise its voice. The stairs creaked under Bumpy Johnson's careful steps, though he hadn't even reached the basement yet. Down below, 6 men leaned over a scratched wooden table, cigarettes burning slow and mean, laughing like predators at the thought of man they wanted gone. They were talking about Nat King Cole, his music, his face, the ease with which he charmed a world that refused to charm back. Their words were sharp, slicing through the smoke, dripping with a pride that had no weight outside that basement. Each joke was a test, a measuring stick for who could laugh the loudest without thinking twice. Bumpy paused at the doorway, not because he needed to see them. He already knew. He could hear the tremor beneath their bravado, the way their knees hit the floorboards when the jokes landed. This wasn't just racism or hatred. This was a plan, and plans, especially the ones made in whispers and shadows, had a way of getting messy when Bumpy walked in. The air shifted the moment he stepped over the threshold. It wasn't loud. There was no dramatic swing of a coat or tap of a cane. Just him, calm and certain, like a storm contained behind dark eyes. They stopped mid-laugh. Cigarettes hung in the air like suspended accusations. No one moved. Silence, thick as syrup, rolled through the basement. One of the men finally dared a glance. Then another, and another. Each face changed the same way. Amusement folding into unease, pride folding into recognition. Bumpy didn't speak. He didn't need to. The weight of him, of every story the streets had told about him, filled the room. He let his gaze settle on them. Not hard, not threatening. Just watching, counting, measuring. There was power in stillness, and he had learned to wield it like a weapon. They had been ready to laugh, ready to decide a man's fate like it was a card game. Now, they weren't sure what to do next. Every second stretched, and in that pause, Bumpy was already deciding who would leave that room with dignity and who would carry the memory of silence for the rest of their lives. And somewhere, beneath the smoke and the fear, a lesson began. One that didn't require a hand on a gun, just a man who knew exactly what the room owed him. Respect. Bumpy didn't rush. He never did. Harlem moved around him, slow and deliberate, like the city itself knew he was passing. Storefronts paused mid-sweep. Shopkeepers stopped at the counters, glances lingering on a man who carried more weight in his silence than most men could muster in a lifetime of shouting. He walked past the brownstones, past the stoops where kids kicked cans and laughed without knowing the rules of the streets. They watched him the way a tide watches the moon, inevitable, unstoppable, quiet in its pull. Nothing announced him, yet everything shifted. Even the street cats scattered, sensing a presence that wasn't loud but impossible to ignore. Bumpy's shoes tapped the asphalt, each step measured. There was no swagger, no arrogance, just a calm certainty that everyone felt in their chest. The men in that basement, he already knew, were a fraction of the city's noise, a fraction of its threats. Harlem had a rhythm, and he was the beat no one dared break. He passed a corner store where a group of older men played cards. Heads turned, then returned to the table. A nod, almost imperceptible, acknowledged the weight of the man walking by. Respect didn't need to be demanded in Harlem. It was earned, and Bumpy had earned it day by day, silence by silence. He paused at the end of the block, just long enough for the shadows to stretch toward him. The neighborhood didn't belong to him. It belonged to the people who lived there, who hustled, who protected what they called theirs. But when trouble came, when plans were whispered in dark corners and basements, Bumpy became the measure. Authority without violence. Power without screaming. A reminder that fear was not the same as respect. Every footstep he took that night carried him closer to the basement. But with each step, Harlem was already whispering the truth. When Bumpy Johnson walked in, even the loudest mouths learned the weight of quiet. The basement had never been so quiet. 6 men sat frozen, smoke curling from their fingers like timid ghosts, as Bumpy Johnson's presence filled every corner. He didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't need one. The threat was in him, contained, controlled, absolute. They spoke now in hushed tones, voices small, words clipped. Each name they had thrown around like a trophy, the target, the plan, hung in the air, fragile under the weight of his gaze. Bumpy listened. He measured. Every detail mattered. Who leaned forward too eagerly, who avoided eye contact, who tried to appear braver than they felt. One of them, braver, or perhaps more foolish, finally spoke, a nervous joke meant to reclaim dominance. Silence swallowed it whole. Bumpy's eyes didn't flinch. His coat hung straight. His hands rested lightly at his sides. The room understood that this was not a man to be pushed, not a man to test. Respect had rules, and Bumpy knew them all. Violence was not the first answer. Restraint was a weapon sharper than any blade, sharper than any gun. A man could be broken with words, with silence, with the simple act of being present and unshaken while chaos sought to hide behind bravado. The tension in the air wasn't just fear. It was recognition. Power without noise, authority without aggression. That was Bumpy's signature. These men thought themselves predators. They thought plans and hatred could outmatch a calm mind. But they hadn't met him before. Not really. He let his gaze sweep the room slowly, deliberately. A flicker of unease danced across faces. Whispers stalled in throats. Cigarettes smoldered but did not burn away the lesson. Bumpy's silence wasn't empty. It was a statement, one that carried the weight of every street, every corner, every story Harlem had ever told about him. In that basement, it became clear violence was possible, yes, but it wasn't necessary. Not when the room itself could be moved without a hand raised. Just a presence walked in. And the men, for the first time that night, realized that their plan had been exposed. Not by shouting, not by a fight, but by the quiet storm that was Bumpy Johnson. The insult didn't stay in the basement. It leaked into Harlem, whispered along stoops, flickering in the corners of neighborhood bars, carried by the men who thought they had been clever. Words can travel faster than fists, and in this city, everyone hears what everyone else is thinking. Bumpy knew before he even entered the building that the joke, the plan, had reached ears that mattered. Respect isn't just about fear. It's about principle. And when someone tests that principle publicly, consequences are inevitable. He arrived quietly, walking past crowds that paused without needing to be told. Eyes followed him. Mothers pulled children a little closer. Shopkeepers straightened, fingers hovering over the register. The city felt him before he even reached the door. That awareness, that unspoken acknowledgement, was the first ripple of justice. Inside, the men shifted. Their bravado from the basement couldn't survive the scrutiny of the streets. Pride, once inflated by the laughter of conspiracy, shrank under the weight of Bumpy's calm. He didn't shout. He didn't call them out. He let Harlem do it for him. Every glance, every pause and movement, every hushed tone in the street became a mirror, showing the men exactly how wrong they had been. Bumpy leaned against the doorway, quiet, patient, letting the room and the neighborhood breathe. Disrespect had a cost. Not immediate, not always visible, but undeniable. And when the lesson landed, when the whispers settled into wary acknowledgement, the men understood. In Harlem, loyalty mattered. Community mattered. And crossing a line, even a basement with closed doors, carried weight that would follow them long after the smoke cleared. Silence became the punishment. Not screaming, not bullets, just presence and awareness. The streets had already begun their work, and Bumpy needed do nothing but remain. Calm, certain, and unshakable. Bumpy stepped fully into the basement, closing the door behind him like sealing a verdict. The air was thick with smoke and tension, but he didn't move quickly, didn't raise a hand. His presence alone rearranged the room. The 6 men shifted in their seats, chairs scraping the floor softly. They looked at one another, hoping for courage in someone else's eyes. There was none. No one spoke. The silence was heavier than any threat they could have imagined. Bumpy didn't need a shout. He didn't need a strike. Every step he took across the wooden floor carried authority, measured and deliberate. One by one, he met their eyes, not with anger, not with mockery, but with a steady, unblinking certainty that left no room for resistance. "You understand," he said finally, voice low, deliberate, "what happens when respect is ignored." No one answered. They didn't have to. He didn't need them to. The lesson was already absorbed. The room felt smaller, tighter, controlled by a calm dominance that made threats irrelevant. A gun or a fist would have been loud, violent, fleeting. Bumpy's method was quiet, enduring, unforgettable. The men fidgeted, realizing that power didn't belong to the loudest voice or the cruelest plan. It belonged to the one who could command a room without raising it, who could shift the tide without spilling blood. In that moment, Bumpy didn't just stop a threat. He cemented his authority, proved that control could be exercised through presence alone. Harlem would remember this night. Not for the jokes, not for the whispers, not even for the fear, but for the way one man could make a room listen without raising a voice. Bumpy Johnson didn't need to fight to win. He just needed to walk in. The basement emptied slowly. Not a word was exchanged, but everyone knew the score. 6 men walked out carrying their pride like a coat 2 sizes too small, heavy and awkward. Bumpy stayed behind for a moment, eyes scanning the room one last time, committing it to memory, the smoke, the silence, the weight of what had passed. Outside, Harlem breathed again, the city exhaling with quiet acknowledgement. Word would spread, as it always did, carried on corners and stoops, through barbershops and church doors. People would tell the story differently, exaggerating or embellishing, but the truth, the calm authority, the restraint, the lesson would remain intact. That was the legacy Bumpy cared about. Not headlines, not fear, respect earned and preserved in the minds of those who understood what it truly meant. Nat King Cole would live another day, unaware of the danger that had brushed so close, yet it mattered less than the principle Bumpy enforced. In Harlem, power didn't scream. It moved quietly, like a shadow that bends the shape of everything in its path. And when Bumpy Johnson walked, the city itself shifted, as if to say, some men cannot be rushed, cannot be shaken, and cannot be ignored. As he walked back into the night, coat pulled tight, steps deliberate, the neighborhood followed. Not with fear, not with whispers of revenge, but with a deep, silent respect. The lesson had landed. The story would carry forward, shaping the streets, shaping the people, shaping the memory of what it meant to hold power without yielding to violence. Bumpy Johnson disappeared into the city, leaving nothing behind but the echo of presence. And in Harlem, that echo lasted longer than any gunshot, any insult, any fleeting threat. It lasted a lifetime.